Welcome to the program. I'm Mark Imperial. This segment's being brought to you by booksgrowbusiness.com. It's the place where business owners, professionals, and entrepreneurs publish to grow their businesses and to leave a legacy. Joining me on this segment is Rene Rodriguez. He's a renowned speaker and coach on behavioral psychology and neuro leadership methodologies. Rene, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Appreciate being here.
Tell us a little bit about your work, a 10,000-foot view, and the specific types of folks that you help.
So when you said I work in behavioral psychology, my focus has been around applied science, the applied behavioral neuroscience. And so not a researcher, but somebody that have had a passion for it for the last 24 years and seeing how does all of that research apply to leadership, sales, creating more influence, not in social media influence, but in terms of interpersonal influence and leadership influence, and also change management. And so we work with, anywhere from some of the largest companies in the world, Cargills and 3Ms, to, mortgage and industry, financial services, and a lot of manufacturing as well.
What is the big challenge that they have? What do they come and seek your help with specifically?
To me, if I were to distill it down, what we have focused all of our energy on is understanding what happens in the brain when it resists an idea, when it resists change, innovation, all of those things. And so the brain works in a certain sequence. And so leaders need to communicate change all the time. That is their job. They're not there to run or manage companies. They're there to change them. And change requires a change in behavior, which inherently comes with resistance. And, everybody says, well, I like change. Well, most people don't like change. And changing behavior to increase sales is a change in behavior. You have to do different activities, whether it's, make more phone calls, be better at your presentation, close better, all requires change in behavior. If you're having people buy into a new vision of a company, that new vision is usually a new direction, which means a change in behavior. If you're trying to innovate in the marketplace and pivot with, what we just went through and are going through with the coronavirus, that's all change in behavior. And so we understand what causes resistance and have a methodology to reduce, if not eliminate, that process to speed ideas to action, if you will.
Speaking of the recent pandemic, what have you seen in your marketplace? Like, I'd imagine your phone's been ringing off the hook. What kind of challenges have you been hearing, and what are companies needing to overcome?
Well, we went from doing 100 events a year to nothing. So it was, we had to do a very fast, and the overused word, pivot, shift into how do you deliver value in a virtual world. And so we focused our energy on saying, okay, what has changed? How do we really leverage the online platforms? And went from typically doing 100 keynotes a year to doing over 300 virtual events in a 9-month period. And so we realized very quickly that people still needed value. They still needed training. They still needed to learn and connect. They just didn't know how. And they didn't know that some of the interpersonal cues that you didn't have when you were live weren't happening when you were on Zoom and or on whatever platform that you use. And so we tried to create a very different experience by trying to replicate and recreate the in-person experience through camera, audio, lighting, location, so that the eye felt like we were there. Because what happens on a virtual meeting is people disassociate from the person talking because they can barely hear them, they can barely see them. It's no different than watching, being in your dining room and there's TV's on in the background in a different room. You hear it, but you're not following the story, so you're not engaging with it. That's what happened in the virtual world, and so we can combat that through some very specific strategies.
This is really fascinating because, as I suspected, with the pandemic hitting, the challenges that companies face, the problems mount, but then your opportunity to serve them face to face and in person have gone down. But as I predicted, you've done 300 live events virtually versus 100 in person, so the demand has gone up. What specifically? It's very fascinating you mentioned that because I've always said, on a Zoom meeting or a virtual meeting, it's hard to have that connection that you do kneecap to kneecap or face to face. Can you give us a couple specific examples of things that you can do to improve that?
Absolutely. Well, you have to first look at we can pay attention to somebody when they're in front of us because we can see them. We see in 3-dimension. Lighting is good. We have natural light and things that go over. But now we have to communicate through a camera. Now that camera has to run through the computer and then through the internet. So everything changes. And most people look like they're trying to shoot a hostage video. and because their lighting is so bad, and or they don't know where to place their their face in screens, so they're super low. There's a ton of headroom above them, and so we try to eliminate some of those basic pieces. I'll have them put their hand on top of their head, and if you go to the top of the screen, if you even did it yourself, you'll see that there's some dead space above you. And to create a more intimate experience, it's different when you're this close versus back here.
Mm-hmm.
And so we try to create some of that intimacy there. And simple lighting, I mean, you know, we can get into 3-point lighting and things like that, but what's amazing is the most valuable of all, and you've got it figured out, is having a good microphone. And I can change my microphone to a bad one, and you can probably hear just how bad that sounds, versus something that is quality. And the quality microphone is what allows you to pierce the screen and feel like you're in the room with them. So when you feel like you're in the room with somebody, it's harder to ignore. That's valuable for running team meetings. It's valuable for sales calls, because the client that needs to listen to your presentation, it can't ignore you and they won't disassociate from you. So it's a really big thing to get the tech right.
Sage advice. So you mentioned something earlier about people saying, "Hey, I like change," but really they don't. Is that a common misconception or a myth about that, or what are people really saying when they think that they like change?
Well, I would say that most people understand that we resist change. And there are some people that say, "Oh, I love change." I said, well, it has nothing to do with change. It has everything to do with the stress that change causes. And so when people say they like change, they're referring to things that don't cause them that much stress, or they've had just so much experience going through the stress that they know on the other side of it is growth. Those are pretty rare individuals, and actually pretty interesting, and people I love having around me. But most people try to resist, and it's in our biology why we resist it. I mean, our body is designed to move us away from stressful, dangerous things. And change causes a lot of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And so when anything is causing a lot of cortisol, our body tends to reject it or move away from it in terms of safety, even if the changes are good for us, like a healthy diet, exercising, not smoking, and reducing our stress, or getting in front of a room to public speak, which could transform our career. People avoid it because it's stressful.
Rene, how did you get started in this field? What inspired you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
It was my mother, 25 years ago, probably, maybe more than that now. She had me look around a room and said, "Tell me what everybody here has in common." And I couldn't figure it out. And she said, "Rene, everybody here has a brain. And if you can understand how that brain works, everything becomes easier." And that's something that I took to heart. And what I've come to learn is that it doesn't matter what language you speak, what color your skin is, where you're from, what part of the country or what part of the world you're from. Our brains function somewhat in the same pattern. And if we can understand that, we know that a smile goes a long way. We know that eye contact is important, but too much eye contact can't be. We know that all of these things are pretty fundamental to how we incorporate and how we interact with one another. And if we know that the sequence of how we communicate a message makes a difference of whether it's heard or not. We all know if you're giving feedback, you don't start with a negative feedback, you start with something positive. That primes the brain to be able to hear what's coming next. And then you can go back to something positive at the end, because it leaves them with a better feeling through recency. And so those are just applied things that we all know. We all know in brainstorming that there's no bad idea. Why is that? It's not because all ideas are good, because they're not. Some ideas suck. But in the process of brainstorming, the brain interprets criticism as stressful, shutting down the creative parts of our brain. And so the good rule is that there's no bad ideas. Let's get them all onto the table. Let the brain kind of explore itself as much as possible. And then afterwards, we can go through it with a fine tooth comb.
You bring up a good point about brainstorming. I find that people really don't know how to brainstorm well. Can you kind of speak to that and talk about how you really should brainstorm, either whether it's with yourself or with a team?
And well, brainstorming, I think our brain is always storming. It's always thinking. And sometimes you're not ready for it. I know for me, when I'm going to bed, when I'm early waking up, I try to have something that I can write on nearby. And sometimes you're in the shower. What do you do with an idea? Use Siri. Say, "Hey, Siri, take a note. Remember this concept and remember this idea." Those things, I think your brain is always running through ideas. And the more space you can give it to think and free write and free create, the better it is. And so, and also people that challenge what your thinking is. I think some people that have no idea what it is that you do, it's frustrating to hear them give advice because they're so disconnected. But sometimes That's exactly what we need. Are we communicating a difficult idea to somebody that doesn't have all the experience that we do? Forces us to really evaluate our language. So I think there's lots of different ways to do it.
Before I ask you my last question, Rene, is there anything that I didn't think of asking that you'd like to share with the audience in terms of leadership or neuro leadership?
I think, excuse me, I think a lot of leaders right now, we in the beginning of the pandemic, I said that at the end of this, they're going to be judged based on how they acted. I watched so many leaders hide under a rock, and very few, but the good leaders sort of stood forward and started actually leading the way during this time. And I think times of stress really reveal who people are. And so now, as we're starting to come back, people are going to experience new things where they're used to working from home. A lot of people are used to working from home. They're not used to being in groups. Some people are going to be missing working in groups. But at the end of the day, they still need to set a clear vision and a clear strategy and a clear direction for where the company is going. They still need to engage people beyond just their daily work. But if you can engage their hearts, things that they're passionate about, you get discretionary effort, which is the sort of holy grail of employee engagement. So all of those things are critical. And the leader's ability to be able to engage people isn't about speaking, and what I always tell people is speaking from the mind, and here's the strategy, here's where we're going. It's connecting to people's values. And our values, got to pay attention, might have shifted a little bit over this time. Some people got closer to their families. Some people started realizing who their friends were and who they weren't, and what was important to them and what wasn't. And so as leaders, we really need to be in touch with where people are at, what they value most, and how do we structure our messages to engage that.
Rene, for my audience that is resonating with what you're saying and sharing, how can they find out more and connect with you?
You can go to my website, crenespeak.com, and Rene is RENE, speak.com. You can also check out my 3-day Amplify leadership event. It's called Amplify, Amplify with 2 I's or the Y, but amplifyyourlife.com. Amplifyyourlife.com. Those are the best ways. And follow me on Instagram at crenespeak, and we can definitely stay connected. Lots of content on my Instagram.
Terrific. Rene, I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing with my audience today, and I wish you continued success for you and for all of your clients.
Mark, thank you very much. I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
Rene Rodriguez, renowned speaker and coach. And this segment's been brought to you by booksgrowbusiness.com. It's the place where professionals, business owners, and entrepreneurs publish to grow their businesses and to leave a legacy. That's all for now. I'm Mark Imperial, and thanks for tuning in.